News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Let me explain. What do? We report the news honestly and fairly. We de-propagandize news. We reduce propaganda to facts. That's the analysis part. We also point out fact and bias. There is commentary, but that's not the news. No, that's just my opinion and just as valuable as yours. So share it, and that's debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. Welcome to the Wells Report. As I have often said, news, or politics rather, poisons everything it touches. And it is something that we must guard against and fix. Politics poisons everything it touches. And now, with the changes at Fox News recently, we now know that journalism is in the bag for the political endeavor. The framers of this nation, in the First Amendment to the Constitution, guaranteed a free press. What they did not anticipate was that the free press would then form itself in league with the political effort. You have seen this. Fox News, for example, put Paul Ryan on its board of directors. And as politics poisons everything it touches, Fox News, arguably, is poisoned. To that end, they dismissed their best number one commentary host for reasons that are still very vague and very odd. And so we haven't really gotten to the bottom of that, and I don't think we will, because there's something called a non-disparagement clause that parties will sign that forbids them from doing anything that might be disparaging. In the news, that's a little bit more difficult because Fox News decisions and their decision making is now subject to news reporting, which is what we're doing right now. Now, I want you to understand that while I admire Tucker Carlson, and I do appreciate his very sterling work as a journalist, I don't agree with everything that he's done. I believe that he's made some serious journalism mistakes. And those journalism mistakes may or may not have contributed to his demise at Fox News. But that being said, the mistakes that I have seen are certainly far, far less in magnitude than the mistakes I've seen in other news organizations as regards to Tucker Carlson. That for whatever reason, it became necessary to dismiss Tucker Carlson. This is not something you have to point out. There was a $787 million judgment or settlement between Fox News and Dominion, but Fox News shrank away from its opportunity to bring Dominion into a courtroom and force it to open up its books regarding how their voting machines operate. And that was a stinging defeat for those of us who believe that there should be honesty in voting. Now, I'm not saying that Dominion is dishonest. I'm just saying that if your operating system for your voting machines is a trade secret, the obvious ramifications of that, well, I don't think need to be borne out again on this broadcast. That being said, Tucker Carlson did release some information. He did release a statement, and here it is. And we have this very strange situation here. Okay. All right. So I set that all up and I run it. And then when I try to run it live on the air, it does not seem to want to work. So
good evening, it's Tucker.
Hang on. Let me do this right. This is very annoying to me. Truly annoys me. It really does. All right. So let's try one more time. Tucker Carlson from yesterday.
Good evening, it's Tucker Carlson. One of the first things you realize when you step outside the noise for a few days is how many genuinely nice people there are in this country, kind and decent people, people who really care about what's true, and a bunch of hilarious people also, a lot of those. It's got to be the majority of the population, even now. So that's heartening. The other thing you notice when you take a little time off is how unbelievably stupid most of the debates you see on television are. They're completely irrelevant. They mean nothing. In 5 years, we won't even remember that we had them. Trust me, as someone who's participated. And yet at the same time, and this is the amazing thing, the undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get virtually no discussion at all. War, civil liberties, emerging science, demographic change, corporate power, natural resources. When was the last time you heard a legitimate debate about any of those issues? It's been a long time. Debates like that are not permitted in American media. Both political parties and their donors have reached consensus on what benefits them, and they actively collude to shut down any conversation about it. Suddenly, the United States looks very much like a one-party state. That's a depressing realization, but it's not permanent. Our current orthodoxies won't last. They're brain dead. Nobody actually believes them. Hardly anyone's life is improved by them. This moment is too inherently ridiculous to continue, and so it won't. The people in charge know this. That's why they're hysterical and aggressive. They're afraid. They've given up persuasion. They're resorting to force. But it won't work. When honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment, they become powerful. At the same time, the liars who've been trying to silence them shrink, and they become weaker. That's the iron law of the universe. True things prevail. Where can you still find Americans saying true things? There aren't many places left, but there are some, and that's enough. As long as you can hear the words, there is hope. See you soon.
All right, so that's Tucker Carlson, who is someone who, for better or for worse, and there have been indeed, like I said before, mistakes made by this man. But few and far between. Tucker Carlson speaks the truth as he sees it. Now, all of us who build truth into everything that we share with you, well, truth is in itself immovable, just as Tucker Carlson says. It's immovable. It's something that is something that will indeed repair itself. It will repair itself, and it will indeed prevail. But there is a lag time. There's a lag time before that actually happens. And so what we have is we have an opportunity for us to say, okay, well, what do we do in the meantime? Well, what we do in the meantime is we gather, as we do here every day between 9 and 11 Central Time, and we discuss the truth. Many of us have different facts. Many of us have facts that are at odds with some of the prevailing opinion, but facts are facts. Truth is truth. And this conclave, this conventional wisdom, if you will, this conclave is absolutely required for continued growth and success in this nation. Now, Tucker Carlson, in the subsequent days of his circumstances, Tucker Carlson has suffered allegations of all kinds. Like, for example, I don't know, now they're saying that he's throwing vulgar language around to his colleagues and about his colleagues. When you start looking at the level of of accusations against Tucker Carlson, what you do is you see all of these things that are relatively small. If you want to hear many of the words that Tucker Carlson is alleged to have said, just turn on any quote-unquote entertainment channel on your television. The fact that there are people saying that Tucker Carlson is a vulgar and terrible man who is denigrating his fellow journalists, etc., All you got to do to see that is look at a White House press conference with Corinne Jean-Pierre. She does it routinely. Nobody says a word. Her language is less colorful, shall we say, at least as alleged. But on the other hand, she does snippy, passive-aggressive things like, for example, a reporter who displeases her finds that the reporter to that reporter's right and left and in front and behind are chosen for questions, but not the reporter that's in the doghouse. But there's a bigger problem. There is a far, far bigger problem. And that's the one that I outlined at the beginning of this monologue. And that is that journalism has essentially rejected its constitutional mandate to provide factual information, not the company line, from both the government and political parties. That is something that will contribute to the period of time between when something happens and when the truth finally comes out about it. And that timing can be used to change things. For example, we haven't heard anything about inflation lately. There is something about economic growth in the nation, and we'll get to that coming up a little bit later on. But there isn't any news about inflation. Why? Well, because it's bad. That's why. And the President of the United States just announced that he is going to run for re-election. And therefore, anything negative is somehow, well, shall we say, edited out of the day's news agenda. I'll find those statistics and I'll share them with you. But that being said, what we must do in this nation, and it's critical, what we must do is we, the people of the United States, must be smarter than the propagandists. We must be aware that our public information sources, the journalistic effort in the United States, is corrupted by politics. Now, I have talked a lot about this. I spend an awful lot of time discussing the state of play in journalism. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is a direct rejection of all those things. I refuse to believe that the First Amendment of the Constitution should be ignored by those who are mandated by it to inform us of government miscreancy. I refuse to believe that you don't deserve the truth. Tucker Carlson's like that. You may not agree with everything I say. I might indeed get things wrong, but I do have to point out that nobody has sued me in a courtroom of any kind for denigrating their lives, like Alex Jones, or just plain getting it wrong, like ABC, CBS, NBC, the New York Times. What I have to say is this. This nation is at a crossroads. We can either become the United States where the free press is free by its own choice, as opposed to surrendering for the scraps under the political table. We can do that, or we can just go along with it, and everything will be just fine. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. If you're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch, you can find the chat room, which is flying. So we're looking at politics poisoning the American journalism industry. It is something that has happened for a long time. I've talked about it a lot on this broadcast because it's true. This broadcast would not exist if journalism had not abdicated its responsibilities to the American people. I'm just a very, very small voice in a very, very large world. But that voice does ring every single day, 9 to 11 Central Time, every morning here, wherever you find us. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. If you're watching on Patreon and Rumble, thank you. Patreon and Rumble, this was broadcast earlier today. When we talk a little bit about journalism abdicating its responsibilities, President Biden was speaking alongside South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol in the White House Rose Garden. A photographer captured a small cheat sheet in the president's hand, signaling he had advanced knowledge of a question from Los Angeles Times reporter Courtney Subramanian. The small paper included a picture of the reporter along with the pronunciation breakdown of her last name. Question number 1 was written at the top of the sheet, indicating the president should call on her first at the conclusion of his remarks. If you want to see this very sad chapter in both American journalism and the President of the United States, look at this. You can see my little mouse there. It's all right there. It is all right there. It is sad. It is sad that we have a president that is indeed incapable of handling questions on the fly. It is sad that the president's interactions with the press are now easily subject to the opinion that they are all scripted. The president is unable to clearly articulate his policy, unable to provide the mental agility required to both know what is going on and to be able to rationally and cogently explain them. The President of the United States doesn't necessarily have to be a mental wizard, but he does have to know what's going on, and he has to be able to speak on those topics. President Biden cannot. The Democrat National Committee yesterday said that there would be no primary debate. Why? Because the president is incapable of primary debate or debate of any kind. There can be no interactions. Go back to the Trump administration. The daily White House press briefings were essentially a food fight between the anti-Trump press and the administration trying to put the news out. It got so bad, they just canceled the White House press briefings. Would they be able to have the same kind of interaction with this president or this press secretary? Absolutely not. Why? Because the effort is incompetent. The state of play continues well beyond this conversation, well beyond this understanding that the president is using a device to script his news conferences. It goes to the very heart of the journalism industry. And there was somebody yesterday who decided to stand up and take the editors at large of the great news journalism efforts at Columbia University and take them to task for their policy and editorial decisions. We'll have that for you as we continue here on the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. It's Thursday, the 27th day of April, a very important day in my life, which I will explain later. It is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being with us today. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Good morning. My name is John David Wells. We bring you the news, the real news, as best as I can, because it's hard. The searches that I have to engage in to be able to find real news takes me around the world. At the beginning of each hour, I say north to south, coast to coast, and around the world. We do have international viewership. Costa Rica, Germany, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. We have people that watch this broadcast all over the place. But that's not why I say it. Why I say it is because I have to go around the world for news, just like I have with this next story. The executive editors of the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, and Reuters gathered at Columbia University. This gathering was to discuss democracy. Three individuals, Jose Vega, Kynan Thistlethwaite, and Sam Netnin, confronted those editors. And what they did is they took them to task for what was nothing short of journalistic malpractice. This journalistic malpractice is something that we deal with on a regular basis. A little bit of background. First, the gentleman, Jose Vega, that you're about to see and about to hear, taking these editors and newsmakers or news publishers to task, references Seymour Hersh. Seymour Hersh was the guy who brought up the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War. What happened at the Abu Ghraib prison. He is that guy. He came up with a report regarding the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline, which he laid squarely at the feet of the United States government, which is what journalism is supposed to be. These august news mavens were then taken to task by Mr. Vega, as they should have been, and it should happen more, not less. This is how it all unfolded. Watch very carefully.
With Seymour Hersh? I'm looking for the one with Seymour Hersh because it's a policy and press hall event. So shouldn't we be talking about the Nord Stream since that's the biggest story of the century? And you guys, I'm sorry. I mean, you have the executive editor of the New York Times there who came out with a phony story to try and block Seymour Hersh. It's just kind of funny how that happened, I mean, did you even acknowledge Seymour Hersh? All of you are executive editors of papers that broke Pentagon, My Lai, Watergate. Is this the same papers or not? I mean, is there anything you've gotten right in the last 20 years, or am I mistaken about that? I mean, it's just kind of funny because Iraq, wrong. Syria, wrong. Russiagate, really wrong. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. So the last thing you could do to try and actually fix your reputation is acknowledge that through leaks, we had to find out that Zelensky was going to bomb Moscow on the anniversary. I mean, if you're so impartial, shouldn't you at least say, right, that Zelensky was going to bring us on the verge of World War III? That seems pretty fair. While Julian Assange rots in prison, all of you've got, fat checks because he's in jail for doing your job. And you know what? Tucker Carlson ain't no Seymour Hersh, but he did something you guys are scared to do. Speak the truth and actually be critical of the war, which is why he was actually fired from Fox, because you are all cowards, every single one of you. None of you have actually had any relevancy. And you know what? The mainstream press is now dying. Nobody's ever going to listen to you again. You have no credibility with the public. The only people who care about what you have to say are elite assholes who have nothing productive to say anymore, and it's dying off. So will you at least say something, either about Nord Stream or Ukraine or the fact that Zelensky brought us to the verge of World War III, and the only reason we knew about that was through leaks? Go ahead. It's a free speech event, right? You guys are the press. Let's say something.
And so it went on for a little while after that. Now, there's something that you need to know. Where did I find that story? Well, the first time I found it was on Twitter. You know, that's one thing that's really cool about people. If the people responsible for bringing the people fact fail to do their job, the people go out looking and they find things and they put them up on Twitter, thankfully returned to the free speech realm by Elon Musk. But where did I find this story? Did I find it on any of those newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters? Did I find any of it there? No. Was it reported on CNN, ABC, CBS, MSNBC? Was it reported there? No. Let me read to you where I got this. It's a place called Op India. It is a unit of Adyasi Media and Content Services Private Limited. It is a news and current affairs website published in India. I had to go to India to find this story. Why? Because American journalism is corrupt. It is corrupt beyond all measure. Everything Mr. Vegas said is absolutely true. The mainstream media is dying. More accurately, it's committing suicide. And in that suicidal chase to lick the boots of the political effort, there are certain observations you can make. He was wrestled to the ground and dragged out of the hall. But all of these people that gathered at Columbia University to listen to these people opine about democracy, whatever they think that is, you could hear the murmurs and you could hear people trying to shout him down. Why? Because they don't want to hear what he has to say. Because they know he's right. They know that journalism, not just in America, but obviously around the world, except when it comes to Op India, is corrupt in service of politics. So what is this gathering for? I'll tell you what it is. It is a conclave to ease guilty conscience, both on the part of these august editors and the people in the room that are looking for, shall we say, a little bit of salve to try to comfort their corrupt decision-making. That's what all this is. That's why we are in the position that we're in. That's why we don't have any idea how Dominion voting machines work. Once again, I'm not saying anything that is happening at Dominion is dishonest. I'm just saying that if you don't know how their voting machines work, how do you know they work? Why wouldn't they say how they work? Oh, it's a trade secret. A trade secret to who? You know, there are copyright laws. They do work everywhere except China, of course. There are copyright laws. Dominion has protection of their, quote, trade secrets. So why is it that they're trying to keep their trade secrets secret? Once again, I am not saying that Dominion is a group of evil people trying to manipulate American elections. I'm not saying that at all. I'm simply asking a question. Why should the American public trust any voting machine whose inner workings are mysterious? Indeed, classified, kept from us. Why should they be trustworthy in any way, shape, or form until they actually open up and tell us how those machines work? Why is there not a journalistic effort to find out? Why is it that we are in a country at this particular moment where no one is allowed to get into the inner workings of 50 presidential elections to find out exactly what happened? If everything is as they say, what will all happen after these investigations is, hey, they were right. It's not hard to do. I will do some work. I will say, for example, get something wrong. Someone on the chat room or via email or via phone call at 817-379-2172 will say, hey, John David, I think you got that wrong. And I have several computers in this room, and I stop the broadcast, and I go find out, and I report the error. I'm still here. You're still here. Does that damage my credibility, or does that make it better? I'm a one-man band. I do my absolute dead level best to bring you the story and bring you the facts. Do I get it right every time? No. Do I depend on you to help me? Yes. I depend on you to ask me questions. I'm not afraid of somebody disagreeing. That telephone number, 817-379-2172, is not for people who agree. I don't have an agreement line, and I don't have a disagreement line that I never answer. You know how to get in touch with me. You can either call me on the phone, 817-379-2172, or you can send me an email, thewellsreport@frontier.com. A lot of people have my private number. John David, you got that wrong. Oh, goodness, let me fix it. Because I'm not worried about retractions. They don't happen often. I've got a 95% rate of accuracy on this broadcast. I know, I keep track. I have very bad days when I get something wrong. Not because I like to beat myself up, but because you don't have any other place to go. You don't have any other place to go. The New York Times styles itself as the paper of record for the United States. USA Today mangles the story, Nicholas Sandman. All of these things continue to plague not just America, but the human endeavor. We must have better. And we do from time to time. Until somebody decides that the alleged use of the C word by Tucker Carlson was sufficient to remove him from the public stage. A lot of people are removing themselves from Fox News. That particular day part, that particular show time that Tucker Carlson inhabited lost 20% of its listeners last week. The erosion has begun. The people's faith in a news organization that said, what was it? Fair, balanced, and unafraid, gave lie to themselves and that policy. Brave words, not executed. In service of the political endeavor. Fox News has now joined CNN. And I warned them. I told them. I told you. When Fox News hired Sarah Palin, when they started putting these noted political figures on their worldwide stage, I said Fox News is biased. And I point out that bias left or bias right, especially in a news organization, is wrong on both counts. We, the people of the United States, must demand better. Why? Why should we demand better? Because this is the only country on the planet in the history of the human endeavor that does not have a totalitarian past. But the powers that be sure are trying to change that, aren't they? The Constitution of the United States is being ignored. Why is it being ignored? Because it's in the way, as it should be. As it should be. This is serious. We, the people of the United States and around the world, must have fact to be able to make rational decisions. Our decision-making capacity cannot be warped or distorted by virtue of the supposed media bringing us fact. They do not. They bring us the political agenda. And we have proof. What will you do about that? What is your next move? Well, I have an idea or two or three. I'll share them with you in just a couple of moments. We'll also go to the chat room and interact with the people there. That's all next. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. We are discussing the state of public information, which is warped and distorted in ways that none of us ever anticipated nor even expected to ever see in our lifetimes, especially in a nation that's based on free speech, freedom of religion, and of course, the free press, which has abdicated its responsibilities to inform the public beyond the political imperative. That's why you're here. What are you saying about all this? Well, let's go ahead and go to the chat room regarding the election of 2020. Mr. Love 825 says, well, it's not important that we know because the states know. Actually, he didn't say all of that. What he said was the states know. So we should be happy with all the information that comes from the state. especially regarding our elections? We should be okay with that? The state explains to us, and we're supposed to be okay with it, right? We don't need an independent investigation. We don't need to hear this through the judicial branch, which is supposed to sort out all these things. Is that right? Mr. Love then goes on to say the machines were vetted. Well, of course they were. Of course they were. Notwithstanding the fact that in at least one case, the machines were tested, everything was fine, and then all of a sudden we had massive malfunctions on election day. And once again, I'm not advocating for fraudulent elections and the accusations of fraudulent elections. What I'm advocating is truth. Ironic, no one had issues until Trump lost. That's right. We were all very sure that everything was on the up and up until eventually things started to change. What happened? What changed? The reason none of this came up until President Trump lost was because the major political parties were in control of the election process until Donald Trump showed up and the people of the United States stepped up and elected him president, firing the entire political effort of the United States because Donald Trump quite literally had no political experience. He couldn't be elected dog catcher in New York, but he was elected as president of the United States by the people. The people did that. Anhoy Guzman says, why do only blue states use those machines? Why were those machines used? Let's see. Why did only where those machines were used did the results change at 2 a.m? I don't know the answers to those questions because we haven't had the investigation. Why haven't we had the investigation? Well, because nobody has standing. There are legal intricacies that we just simply don't understand. Oh, okay. All right. Fox News gave an update on Australia News yesterday that Tucker was dumped because he thought he was better than the network and could say what he wanted. It's true. It's absolutely true. I saw that article. Where did you see it? Well, who had it first? Australia News. Fox reported it. Yeah. And so what do you do? It is obvious to anyone, certainly this reporter, that anything that is in the mainstream media, if it's on your television, if it comes from a huge network or a great newspaper, your default setting must be skepticism. It must be. Therefore, skepticism requires you to go out and find the truth. But John David, I don't have time. I have time. Not only do I have time, this is my job. My job is to provide you with reality, whether it agrees with me or not, whether it makes me look like I know what I'm doing from a standpoint of actual good analysis or not. If I make a mistake, you're going to know it. You know why? Because you have to. If the mainstream media makes a mistake, do you know it? No. Sometimes. But mostly no. Because propaganda works by leaving things out. Jose Vega brilliantly brings up the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Seymour Hersh, a guy who reported on government miscreancy throughout his entire career, published by all of those very same people, suddenly could not get a platform for his story. If you need to know something, call me on the telephone, 817-379-2172. Send me an email, thewellsreport@frontier.com. Please, I just ask because I get a lot of spam on that account. Just put where you saw the Wells Report, what platform it was, whether it was Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Rumble, Patreon. Ask your question. I will give you an answer. I will research it for you so you don't have to. Because, like I said, this is my job. It's more than a job, it's a calling. It is a requirement of Americans, especially now, to inform ourselves. I will help. I won't back away. But doubtless at some point you'll find out that I'm just a horrible, terrible person. More about that coming up in just a couple of minutes. I have one more thing to say on this topic, then we'll move on to other things. This is the Wells Report. Thank you very much for joining us. I sincerely appreciate it. Back with more in just a moment. These are tough times. We must stand together strong. We'll work it out. Back in a moment. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Welser Report. We report the news honestly, fairly, truthfully. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary which is not news, regardless of what you've been conditioned to believe. There are people that do this job that believe that everything they say is some nugget that needs to be carved into granite. I'm not that guy. My commentary is just my opinion, just as valuable as yours, and so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. And as I said last hour, if you missed it, by the way, as I said last hour, we are in perilous times, not because of war or some other kind of national problem, national, natural, or man-made disaster. We are in peril because those who have been charged by the Constitution of the United States to be skeptical, to chase fact, no matter where those facts lead, have abdicated their constitutional calling in service of politics. I said that I would look up whatever it is that you needed to know, whether you ask me or not. And I was talking about inflation, something that we haven't seen much of. I had to go chase inflation figures because, well, they're better but not good. For example, the March inflation rate is currently 4.98%. The consumer price index is 5% higher than it was in previous times. If you go back to March of 2022, you'll find that the inflation rate was 8.54%. If you go to March of 2020, it was 1.54% in the height of the COVID mess. April of 2020, the inflation rate was 0.33%. May, 0.12%. June, 0.65%. July, 0.99%. Today, 4.98%. So the raise you got was immediately sucked up by everything being more expensive. I paid $3.65 a gallon for the fuel that I put in my car. And the reason that I did that is because, well, the reason I paid so much is because I run premium in my car. And yes, I could do it cheaper, and I, as a matter of fact, have. What I have done is I normally buy gasoline from Chevron because it has an additive that actually works. It's called Techron. But that particular chemical is much more expensive than, say, for example, the QT gasoline that I bought this morning. It was $3.69. And so inflation in these dry numbers are, well, the numbers are better than they have been, but not as good as they should be, or as good as they have been in the recent past. Note that I was talking about 2020. Well, those days are gone. We'll see what happens next as we continue our work. We were talking about those people who abdicate their responsibility regarding just exactly what's going on, and I referenced the 2020 election. Not saying the 2020 election was wrong. I'm just saying there are questions that have been unanswered. Why are they unanswered? Because of fascist news bombardment of people who disagree with the prevailing news of the day. News of the day. It's propaganda. And so someone said, well, wait a minute. The states know. The states know what happened in the election, and the implication is that's good enough. No, it is not good enough, because these questions remain unanswered. They remain unanswered. The most basic, 155 million people voted in the 2020 presidential election. According to the 2010 census, There were 165 million American voters. That's a 94% turnout. Didn't happen. Never has happened. Never will happen. Well, wait a minute. You got to use the 2020 census. Okay. 203 million registered voters. Well, that's a 74 or 75% turnout. That also never happened. How come nobody has checked into that? Well, because every time somebody tries, they get stomped on. Suddenly we find out that they like to take part in a local community group that punts cats. See how far they can kick a cat down a football field. And they are obviously horrifyingly terrible people, and therefore must be ignored. Well, just exactly who are the horrifying and terrible people? Well, let's go back to the political endeavor. There is something going on in Minnesota that you need to be aware of. The headline from Fox News is, "Arguing COVID came from China could land you on Minnesota's government bias registry." This is part of a brand new bill that's being talked about in the State House. Minnesota State Representative Harry Niska asked during a debate on a new bill whether praise for Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling or arguing that COVID originated in China would qualify as biased speech that would put a citizen of Minnesota on a government database. Minnesota lawmakers are mulling a change to state law, House File 181, that would log alleged bias incidents even when they are not considered a crime. The bill, introduced in January, would allow people to report perceived bias-related incidents, such as alleged slurs and verbal attacks, that would fall outside the hate crimes compiled annually by the State Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. This according to the St. Cloud Times. Republican State Representative Walter Hudson warned House File 181 would pose a threat to religious freedom. It poses a threat to everything. It seems very clear, based on the focus and motivation, they're concerned more about what's going on in people's heads, which is protected. To try to lean on people, to try to stop them from speaking out, regardless of whether you agree or not, and then to try to create law that would identify those people in a government database is the pursuit of thought crime. Thought crime. That's 1984. An exchange between Niska and fellow state Representative Samantha Van, who, by the way, is a Democrat, occurred when Niska asked several hypothetical questions. If a Minnesota writes an article claiming or arguing that COVID-19 is a Chinese bioweapon leaked from a lab in Wuhan, and someone reports that article to the Department of Human Rights in Minnesota, is that something that the Department of Human Rights would put on their bias tree under your bill? Vang argued that while not all incidents are considered violent or criminal, this sort of rhetoric is bias motivated and therefore can be considered a bias incident. Niska, in what may be certainly the understatement of 2023, said, very troubling. You think? He posed another question, whether someone wearing an I Love J.K. Rowling t-shirt should be added to the database. If a Minnesotan is wearing a t-shirt that says I love J.K. Rowling and someone sees that and reports them to the Minnesota Department of Human Rights as an example of gender identity or gender expression bias, is that something the Minnesota Department of Human Rights should put in its database? Vang suggested the question would be better answered by lawyers. I'm not going to say yes or no to that opinion. Why not? Why not? So we should take the state's word? Should we? Should we be under constant surveillance? Not necessarily by the state, but by our own neighbors? Has that happened before? Yes. Yes, it has. In a place called East Germany. The people of East Germany dutifully reported their neighbors on a constant basis It wasn't a biased database, it was the Stasi. The Stasi finally had so many records on so many people they couldn't keep up with all of them. That, by the way, was the most successful socialist state. How many people did East Germany kill? Countless. Well, what do you mean? Well, did you ever see any of the films of people trying to cross the Berlin Wall into West Germany? What happened there? Well, they were shot. It happened virtually every day. People realizing that this government was grotesquely monstrous. And so people trying to escape it were shot. What about the people that weren't shot? What about the people that were convicted of wrongthink? To once again allude to 1984. What about those people? What about those people? They just disappeared. There's a famous prison in Moscow. It's called the Lubyanka. It is widely known fact that there is a disposal mechanism in the bowels of that building that will take people who have been executed, hopefully before they're thrown into it, where their bodies are ground up and injected into the Moscow River. That's not a conspiracy theory. That exists. Have people in the United States suddenly disappeared or passed away based on what they tried to tell the American people? Andrew Breitbart, ring a bell? Guy in his 40s suddenly dies. Michael Hastings, a reporter that tells his friends, look, I'm going underground for a few days. I've got something incredibly big. And then crashes his Mercedes-Benz into a tree in Los Angeles, going well over 100 miles an hour. Once again, I'm not saying that actually happened. What I'm saying is that it did happen. It's a matter of record. I've been on this broadcast, and I have brought up things along this line, and I have had caring people reach out to me and say, hey, man, you got to be more careful about stuff like that. Really? Why? Chuck Schumer famously said, you can't take on the intelligence agencies. They will get to you 6 ways from Sunday. He was talking about President Trump. Did that happen? That I can report truthfully as, yes, it did happen. And someone who used to run the FBI headed up the so-called investigation that found nothing. But yet, netted news sources Pulitzer Prizes for their reporting that turned out to be wrong. There's more. This is the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. Chat room available, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. So remember, this was a couple of days after Tucker reported there was a biolab supported by the U.S. in an out-of-the-way country called Sudan. Well, what happened to that story? That has to do with Tucker Carlson being dismissed or agreeing to walk away from Fox News, depending on your point of view. Poker says anybody with a brain knows that a massive coordinated effort involving Hillary, Obama, and the leftist media, the Swamp et al., combined to steal the 2020 election because Trump beat Hillary. No, Poker. Everyone with a brain doesn't know that because no one knows that. Nobody knows that that actually happened. Now, there might be people who think that could have happened, but we don't know. And so Michael Garcia says the Trump administration filed multiple lawsuits in multiple states to uncover potential election fraud. There was not enough evidence, and a lot of judges that shot these lawsuits down were appointed by Trump. Correct. But if the Democrats are the number one anti-Trump force, what's the number two anti-Trump force when it comes to politics? What is it, Michael? Well, it's the Republican Party. That's who. And from a standpoint of actual law, those judges made determinations that, while I might disagree with some of them, were certainly within the purvey of the law. That being said, in my view, the scenario goes like this. Someone has a question about the election. Someone asks for the information from the state. The state refuses to give it. A lawsuit ensues. The lawsuit is dismissed. The information stays out of the public view. Why was the lawsuit dismissed? Not enough evidence. Well, where's the evidence? In the possession of the state, being sued. And so the information stays private, out of the public view. That, sir, is the legal entropy of the 2020 election. We were talking a little bit about East Germany. Gary says kind of reminds you of the 1930s Germany, Stalin and his gang. Yeah. Trump lawyers were asked for evidence. They stated they had nothing, says Mr. Love 825. True. That's true. They didn't say they had nothing, but they wanted to investigate. The investigation never happened. That's why I tell Poker, we don't know that there was election fraud in 2020. I've never said there was. I've just got questions. Can't get the answers. Well, you can't get the answers because nobody cares about what you think. Well, that might be true. That might be true. Nobody cares what you think, John David. Okay. But somebody does. Somebody has these same questions. Why aren't they being addressed? I looked up the worst prisons, says Margaret. Moscow is one of them. But you find out you have to look up the worst prisons. You'll be amazed at the people here in prison compared to the rest of the world. It's like they're in a hotel. I remember reading an article, says Martha, that people in cold cities committed small crimes to be arrested to get put in jail for 4 or 5 months for protection from the weather. Well, these are all anecdotal things. If the government has its foot on your throat, does it matter what color shoe it is? There's a law that would create a bias registry in Minnesota. If you say something, well, my goodness gracious, you could end up being under scrutiny by the government of Minnesota. Is that okay with you? Well, it's not okay with me. This is the Wells Report, coming up in just a couple of seconds. The ATF is in the news. I'll share in a moment. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. So the state's okay, right? We can trust everything they say. The mainstream media is reporting what we need to know, and we should believe everything they say. Really? One of the things that you have to do to be able to have a totalitarian government is you have to render the people powerless. You have to control their heat when it's hot, or when it's cold, and cold when it's hot. You have to control their food. You have to control their medical care. You have to control their transportation. You have to control their energy use. You have to control all of it. And this country is certainly headed in that direction. That's why 71% of Americans believe the country's headed in the wrong direction. That being said, there is some bright news when it comes to, one of the other things you have to get rid of. You have to get rid of the people to defend themselves from this obviously right and righteous, benevolent and loving government that simply wants to tell you how to live and controls every part of your life. You have to be able to remove weapons from the populace. Because if you don't remove weapons from the populace, they might use them to defend themselves from an overarching tyrannical government. The Department of Justice, their new gun control effort, is showing progress on straw purchases and gun trafficking. This from USA Today. President Biden signed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act last summer, making it a federal crime to traffic in firearms and stiffening penalties for straw purchases made on behalf of people who are not allowed to own guns. By the way, if you purchase a weapon for someone else that cannot own a gun, you should go to jail for that. You should. Now, can you make an argument that the people that are not allowed to own guns by the state were badly judged? Yeah, you can make an argument for it, but the judgment stands until it's reversed. You buy a gun for somebody that doesn't qualify to own a gun, you're a criminal. Don't do it. That brings us to trafficking in firearms. Sadly, the government of the United States, through that abomination known as Fast and Furious, had no problem trafficking in firearms because they were trying to create a legislative opportunity to reduce gun rights in the United States. So they broke a crime in order to pass new law to prevent a crime. I don't know whether they've been arrested or the perpetrators of Fast and Furious during the Obama years. I don't know whether they have fallen under the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but I expect that will be forthcoming, don't you? Data from federal prosecutors shows that they have, with the stiffening of straw purchases and weapons trafficking, new data from federal prosecutors shows they've charged 31 people in 17 cases under the new legislation. Hundreds of millions of firearms, 330 million people in the United States, and they found 31 of them. Spokeswoman Carolyn Collins called the new laws powerful new tools. Yeah, they got 31 people. The changes to the Federal Gun Control Act are designed to enhance the ATF's ability to identify, deter, and investigate those who illegally divert firearms from lawful commerce. By the way, if you do that, you're a criminal. At least this shows that gun control efforts are focused, at least in some small particle, on the right people. The people who are criminals. Common sense gun law assigns legal remedy to those who break the law, not to those who don't break the law. Nor should they create law so that people that are otherwise law-abiding citizens break the law. First case prosecuted with the new laws was against Saeed Hernandez, 26 years of age, in Laredo, Texas. He's going to jail for 7 years for gun trafficking. Police intercepted Hernandez traveling south on Interstate 35 towards the Mexican border with 17 firearms. By the way, if you cross the border with a firearm from Texas to Mexico, you go to jail in Mexico. It's not a pleasant experience. He purchased 231 handguns in Texas in the calibers of 9mm, 380, and 22, and trafficked them to Mexico. In other words, you don't get across the border with firearms unless you're welcomed to do so. In public announcements, the ATF warns that straw purchase can now carry a 25-year prison sentence if the gun is used in a terror attack or drug trafficking. Once again, I have no problem with gun law focused on criminals. I have a problem with gun laws that focus on law-abiding citizens. It's not real simple when you start getting into the minutia of it. There is a guy named Steve Dettelbach. He is the director of the ATF. Dettelbach was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, speaking about the pistol brace rule. So somehow you can take what is an AR-15 and shrink it down and call it a pistol. And then, because you don't have a stock, you don't have something that braces it, they came up with pistol braces, which are stocks. So what happens there is what you have a firearm that is called a short-barreled rifle, which is against the law. Why are short-barreled rifles against the law? No one really knows, but somehow they are some horrible arch weapon to be used or could be used at some point in the future. You know, we don't have law that prosecutes people for what might happen. We have law that prosecutes people for what has happened. But that is under investigation by the powers that be, and they are edging closer to some change to render people, again, powerless before the state. Dettelbach was questioned by Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who asked the ATF director whether he knew what an assault weapon was after a recent mass shooting in Buffalo, New York. Sheila Jackson Lee is entertaining. She asked a question. She said, "Let me just hold up to pay tribute and acknowledge those who are deceased. Their families still mourning of the incident in Buffalo at a grocery store. It was an assault weapon that killed him. My question to you is simply a yes or no. Do you know what an assault weapon is? Have you seen one?" The director of the ATF, the person that's supposed to know all there is about weapons and their use in the United States and the enforcement of law regarding them, refused to answer the question. He said the term is not something he's qualified to rule on. And that statement is good and bad. First of all, he's not qualified to rule on it. He's not a judge. He's an enforcer. But he should know what an assault weapon is if there are laws on the books in this nation that define an assault weapon as something evil and horrible. And then what he did was he deflected that decision, that definition, back on Congress. Again, that would be a decision for Congress to make respectfully as to make the definition. There are numerous different legislative bodies that have taken up that question. Lee then said, hey, wait, if we laid a weapon on the table, you could pretty much say this falls into the category of an assault weapon. The ATF director said respectfully, that is a decision that different legislative bodies have come up with different definitions for. It would be for the legislators to make that determined action as to know how they would define an assault weapon unless they were to delegate that authority to the ATF. The man who's responsible for enforcing America's gun laws doesn't know and will not say what an assault weapon is. Mr. Dettelbach, you're fired. Gone. Bye. See ya. In point of fact, the legislative bodies of the United States did indeed define an assault weapon during the assault weapons ban that Joe Biden talks about over and over and over again. And what immediately happened was gun manufacturers altered the very same weapons with different features, firing the very same cartridge, and everything went along just fine. For those people who are weapons devotees, that's how we got the Mini 14. Fires the same round as an AR-15, and it's a darn good rifle. It's a darn good rifle. They don't want to define what an assault weapon is because then politics can rule the day as opposed to law. The person responsible for law will not opine on what an assault weapon is, leaving the door wide open for that, shall we say, convenient political definition that can be easily flanked. And they don't want that. Why? Because they don't want people to be able to defend themselves against an overarching government. There is no ambiguity about this government being willing to use people with real weapons of war to pacify the public. It happened during January 6th. They put a razor wire fence around the Capitol and put 26,000 National Guardsmen with weapons of war inside that perimeter to defend it. Where were those weapons of war pointed? They were pointed at us. House Republicans pressed the director of the ATF and questioned his expertise in criticizing a rule that would toughen regulations on firearms with stabilizing braces. The House Judiciary Committee heard feisty, testy exchanges with Republican lawmakers who sometimes cut off ATF Director Stephen Dettelbach or accused him of not answering the questions. Texas Representative Troy Nehls said, quote, "I'm not getting anything from him. I just want the American people, everybody to understand you're going after veterans, people like myself." The tone of the hearing underscored GOP grievances with the agency over a rule that would require gun owners before June to register their pistols with stabilizing braces. They'd have to register them as short-barreled rifles. I've criticized the rule about short-barreled rifles. Somehow they are some horrifyingly evil implement of death. Really. The vast majority of gun crime, or what is referred to as gun violence, the vast majority occurs with pistols, hand weapons. And I'm not talking about rifles that are shrunk down to pistol size. They're pistols. Short-barreled rifles, ostensibly, are against the law because they are easily concealed. Are pistols not easily concealed? When you also consider that in the 99 percentile, most people that carry weapons in the United States are law-abiding and never use them. Do we really need a law creating a crime that has no real basis in reality or fact? Short-barreled rifles. Right. Well, what about sawed-off shotguns? They're dangerous, and they're also against the law. Anything under 18 inches? I guarantee you someone that has been shot by a sawed-off shotgun, say 12 inches long, right? I don't think they could probably tell the difference between how they'd been shot by a 12-inch shotgun versus being shot by an 18-inch shotgun. And by the way, if you fire a 12-gauge shotgun that's 12 inches long, not only will your adversary be badly, badly injured, but so will you. Will very likely break your wrist. Matt Gaetz, the Republican from Florida, has then introduced a bill and urged his colleagues to abolish the ATF. They should. He said something that was really quite good. He said that the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, shouldn't be a federal agency. It should be a retail store. Why am I telling you this? I'll explain next as we continue on the Wells Report today. I'll put it all together for you, so you ought to stick around. Yeah, by the way, Ann points out a cast iron frying pan can be an assault weapon. Yeah. Yep. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for being a part of this broadcast today. Why did my mouth stop working? This is the Wells Report. Thanks for being a part of this broadcast today. That being said, what have we learned? What we have learned is this. There is no respite from the American news media's intercourse with political power. There's no respite. Fox News, in its settlement with Dominion Voting Systems and its firing of Tucker Carlson, has joined the ranks of the mainstream media in not giving the American people the facts they need to make reasoned decisions. Can't make reasoned decisions without fact. And remember, propaganda is not a creature of creation. It is a creature of omission. Propaganda is successful not by what you report, but what you leave out. Fox News decided to leave out Tucker Carlson and his truth, which, by the way, resonated to the point where he was their highest rated commentary star, and they fired him. Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, a politician, is on the board of directors of Fox News. That is the poisoning of news by politics, right there. So there now is no respite. I pointed out that Fox News was biased toward politics for years. Now they've confirmed it. So, the mainstream media is a political lapdog. Those people who jump off the lap or take a nip at the person's ankles whose lap is provided are immediately canceled, just like Tucker Carlson. What else have we learned? Truth tellers walk a dangerous game of cancellation. Regardless of whether or not the truth is real or not, regardless of their success, they are dispatched if they displease those who are having intercourse with the political effort in the United States. We've also learned that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is essentially pursuing a Moby Dick-like creature in what they call short-barreled rifles. Any rifle that is shrunk down to pistol size and therefore called a pistol, but yet still has a pistol brace, is a short-barreled rifle. The problem isn't necessarily the shrinking of these rifles to pistol size. That's not really the problem. The problem is the law around short-barreled rifles. Well, they're easily concealed. So's a pistol. The vast majority of gun crime in the United States is accomplished by pistols, not by short-barreled rifles. So why is that law on the books? Because it's convenient. It's an opportunity to make otherwise law-abiding citizens into felons that can be sent to jail for 25 years. That's on the books. You have until June. You have until June to change your short-barreled pistol or your pistol-braced pistol into a short-barreled rifle. It's not difficult. It costs $200. You get a tax stamp. You carry it with you when you have the pistol. Do it. I work at a gun store. That is the same advice I give to everybody that brings one of those things in, because we tell them to take the pistol brace off before we will work on their weapons because they're illegal. And I just simply refer people down to the desk on my right and say, go ahead and register this as a short-barreled pistol or short-barreled rifle. Why not? It's $200. It's a lot cheaper than a lawyer to try to defend yourself in federal court. And I will tell you this. Register your pistol. If it's a shrunken down rifle into a pistol, register it as a short-barreled rifle and get on with your life. There's a way to do that. Please make use of it before they take it away. So what we have is the mainstream media in bed with politics. We have politics poisoning everything, and we have an agency that refuses to define the work it does. Therefore, it can do its work under whatever definition they can find at the moment. The lines of force are pointed at law-abiding citizens in the United States in an effort to render them powerless before the maelstrom of tyrannical and oppressive government. Surveillance, is becoming the way of things. In Minnesota, they're trying to pass a bill that would make it incumbent on citizens to report fellow citizens who say things that they believe are biased to be put in a government registry. We've learned that anybody that tries to get to the truth of elections in the United States, one's coming up, well, they will be shut down in one way or another. Make of this what you will. This has been the Wells Report for the 27th day of April, year of our Lord 2023. I'm John David Wells. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow for another edition of the Wells Report. And so it goes. Let's see. Let's go through this. A fellow just got 45 years for selling a credit card-sized piece of metal with an etching of a lightning link on it. ATF said it was a machine gun. I'll have to look that up, Texan. See what else. The government should abolish all of the extraneous agencies. The Supreme Court already ruled they cannot set law. Only Congress can. So Biden signed an executive order written by who knows that the EPA can, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that was John Roberts when he decided that Donald Trump could not issue an executive order canceling one of President Obama's executive orders, thereby conferring on the president the ability to make law at the resolute desk. Okay? How can truth tellers tell the truth unless it is truth or not? Very simple. Do you believe it or not? The actual conference of truth on any particular given commentary or news story or set of supposed facts rests with the recipient, not the reporter. If you don't believe it's truth, fine with me. But one of the things about truth, it will out. Remember all those people that said the vaccinations wouldn't work? Guess what? They didn't work. But from the time that they said that the vaccinations wouldn't work, they were castigated, stomped on, canceled, etc. And then we found out that they indeed don't work by the manufacturers themselves. In that space of time, 70% of Americans got inoculations that did not work at the behest or even order of the government of the United States. So once again, truth will out. And it has, and it always will. Thank you very much, Ann. She says that was a great show. Thank you. I'll be back. God bless all and stay safe. Common sense, which people don't have. Ginny Bayless says, wow, I'm back. Good morning. Good morning, Ginny. Thanks for coming. All right, I got to get back to work. Actually, I have a day off today, so I've got other work to do, including the celebration of my 27th wedding anniversary. Before I go, I want to make this plain. I would not be here if it wasn't for Susan Grushinsky Wells. I would have been long gone. Indeed, there would have never been the Wells Report had it not been for her steadfast support of what I do. I was about to leave radio in September of 2001 because I needed to do something more profitable because Susan wanted a house. 9/11 happened. The first edition of the Wells Report was on that day. After it was over, I changed. I came to Susan and I said, Susan, the nation is under attack. What Americans need to do at this time is do what they do best. For better or for worse, what I do best is broadcasting. And instead of saying, but I want a house, she looked at me and she says, I know. She has subsidized this broadcast for the last 3 or 4 years with her work, because while I was a general manager of a radio station, I thought it was more important that my employees had their paychecks than me having mine. That was the choice. Had I taken my paycheck, we would have bankrupted not just the radio station, but the USA Radio Network. And so we did not. So I did not. I went without a paycheck for 2.5 years. And then I did not have a job when I got back from my deployment with the Texas State Guard on the border of Texas and Mexico. And so we have this. We have the Wells Report in my blown up studio. Hopefully I'll be able, I've got to get a washer and dryer, a microwave, and a brand new oven before I can start putting another television up there and filling some of these equipment racks with the equipment I need to do this job. I just simply have to. So stick with me. Anyway, not only did she make it possible for me to be here, not only did she sustain and support my professional endeavor as a broadcaster, she gave me a son. Colton Joseph Grzinski Wells is a beautiful 6'2" giant of a man who's finding himself. It's a joy to watch. She gave him to me. With that being said, I now go to celebrate my marriage to a woman who has made my life possible, who repaired the damage from someone who came before her, who I also gave sons to, and who took them away from me. There's arguable cause for her to take those same steps, but she stands fast before the maelstrom. It's my anniversary to Susan Grzinski Wells, and I go now to celebrate it. God bless you and your endeavors, and I will see you again tomorrow, 9 to 11 Central Time, right where you are right now. God bless you and yours. Until tomorrow. Be safe. Make good decisions. You know who said that first? Susan Grzinski Wells. So I'm going to go make good decisions, like where am I going to find flowers?